watching the truce what he brings. Satellite eyes and maps laid wide. Too many tabs, but he sees through the lies. Smokey's old tales don't hold no sway. Zeke's research shows fire clears the way. Oh, the lookout, hear the banjo call, telling about the flames that shape us all. Forests grow strong when the fire's set free. Zeke's voice rings out for the wildwood mead. About the flames that shape us all. Forests grow strong when the fire's set free. Zeke's voice rings out for the wildwood and me.
All right, it's pretty silly stuff. I've got a super fan, Jake Tripp, and he's figured out how to make songs with AI, which I didn't know was possible. But he sent that to me today, and it cracked me up. Totally cracked me up. I pictured like some sweet like folk singer girls in Nevada City like writing a song for me or something. But it's a robot. Anyway, thanks Jake Tripp. It cracked me up, and I like it. So what's going on, people? We're going to talk about the NorCal fires, and we're going to talk about the Grand Canyon fire that burned up the lodge at the North Rim. Yeah, Jake also made another Lookout song that's kind of more indie pop, and but yeah, I like the cute folky robots more than the kind of edgy post-pump guys. Someone's asking if I saw the fire NATO near Moab. Yeah. All right. So one thing that happened today that we got was some fresh satellite imagery from our favorite satellite, the Sentinel. And what that stuff's good for is seeing kind of the effects of fires. And so we're going to jump in. We're going to go kind of straight to the green fire here. We're going to talk about the green fire. We're going to talk about fire in Orleans, and then we're going to go to the Grand Canyon. So let's jump over to the map. All right, so this green image is Sentinel. It was taken today. So it was taken right about the same time that OES flew this fire. So just to zoom out for everyone, here's Redding over here, and here's Bernie up here, and in between Round Mountain and everywhere else. So we've been talking about this fire for a while, so if you don't know what we're talking about, maybe go back and watch the earlier videos. But this fire's been kind of a slow motion fire, and what I've got to say about kind of fire season in general is that right now there's kind of crickets in NorCal, except for these 3 big fires we've been following. But other than that, new fires are getting kind of smashed on initial attack, and a lot of that has to do with lots of aviation resources and not a whole lot of wind, right? Fuels aren't critically dry in Northern California. They're kind of a little above average, which is dry, but not catastrophically Dixie Fire dry. So anyway, this fire here we've been watching, it's burned really, like we talked about, kind of like an onion, slowly backing out onto this peninsula here of Lake Shasta Lake, and really slowly moving its way towards Fender's Ferry Road. So what has not happened on this fire is the fire has not blown up, and it has not crossed the ridge system. So on this image from today, you can see actually the dozer line that they've pushed now all the way out to kind of the endless main ridge that is between Rip Gut Creek and Fender's Ferry Road. This is Fender's Ferry Road through here. And on this ridge, these blue lines are today's perimeters and yesterday's perimeters. So you can see that they've been slowly firing down this ridge off of the dozer lines they've created to kind of try to buffer this fire line before the fire crosses Rip Gut Creek here and makes a run up canyon at them. So we've been talking about this happening for over a week, wondering how much time we had, and evidently up in here we've had enough time, in that they've gotten a nice amount of burnout established here. You can see that kind of yesterday morning they'd fired about a mile down this ridge and hadn't got a lot of depth, and so last night they got more depth on that firing, and they're using drones with ping pong balls, and the ping pong balls catch on fire after they drop out of the drone. And so tonight they're going to probably keep firing this ridge. This is last night's firing, I'm thinking, and there was still heat along this edge. So these kind of orange pixels you can see on this satellite are active flame. So you can see where the fire was backing from what they lit probably early this morning. So they're kind of right on the margin here. The fire's back down to Rip Gut Creek, and you can see the fire itself. There's a few areas of concentrated heat, but this fire is really backing slowly. So what you can see from this image that I think is interesting is that green areas are places we've still got intact forest canopy. A lot of this is oaks, and we always expect that like the radiant heat of a fire is going to kill trees that were still green like right after the fire. But in general, you can see that most of this landscape is underburned, meaning the fire hasn't been standing up and making big mushroom clouds. The place that the fire did make the big mushroom cloud 3 days ago was burning up here on the Brock Mountain. And you can see that head fire run did kind of burn with some high severity in these kind of steep chutes, but that even a lot of the area here where it head fired up, there's still green trees. So we're always really interested in this fire effects, because I think a lot of people picture a fire and you see the media say, oh, the fire is scorched 13,000 acres. It's like, well, it burned 13,000 acres, but that doesn't mean that it fried it all. So it's kind of slow motion on this fire. Yesterday there was a spot over here. Overnight they picked that up. They've got some boats out here that can shuttle firefighters across the lake. And another thing that's happening on this fire that we'll jump to is they've got a ton of resources. And sorry, let's get you something to look at while we pull up my... Give me a second here. So when you look at the operations map for today for the green fire, they're getting a lot of work done. They got a lot of people out there, and we'll talk a little bit. We'll go through the map here, and we'll talk a little bit about what you can see on an operations map. All right, so this is what we call kind of a standard operations map on a fire, and it's a big file, and so it kind of chokes Adobe, but Adobe's what everyone uses, so we're kind of stuck with it. All right, so looking at this fire, these X'd kind of dark black lines are dozer lines. And so you can see that we've got the shoe fire up here that we've been talking about on the north end that the fire's now burned into, and they kind of fired off the edge of the shoe fire. I'm not sure how much they needed to do that there, but they wanted to tie this all in, and just because it burned last year doesn't mean there's no fuel in it. There could be grasses and other stuff. It's not going to just burn right up to the edge of that fire and burn out. But you can see that along this line, coming down the ridge, you can see they've put in a ton of dozer line from what's already fired down, all the way down to as far as they can get down by the Pitt River arm of the lake. They've got parking areas kind of pushed out, and they've pushed all these little side ridges too. So if you call CAL FIRE and tell them to bring a dozer, they're going to bring like 10 of them, and they're going to push everything they can push. They're really aggressive. And so they've pushed all these ridges that were pushed during the shoe fire. They've opened stuff back up. They've prepped these roads, Fender's Ferry, and then they've backed off the next ridge past Fender's Ferry and prepped that whole road, put in dozer line. They got more planned lines. So these maps show existing line and planned line. So they've prepped roads on the other side of the lake, and they've pushed dozer line all along the top of the slope on the other side of the lake. They've prepped roads all around kind of between 299 and the fire. So that's what happens when you've got 1,500 people working on a fire that's 10,000 acres is you have a lot of manpower per acre. And there's a limited amount of work that can be done in this area just because of the space. So once they push everything close to the fire, they've got contingency people and they're pushing way out. So even if this fire, does cross the firing operation, this primary line, which right now it's looking like they've got good momentum to be able to potentially execute this strategy and keep the fire from crossing. It might take them another 2 days to fire this, but the rate at which the fire's backing has been really slow. So interesting to look at the ops map and back up. Talk a little bit more about ops maps. Basically, these maps get printed overnight, and then they get handed out to folks the next morning at the briefing. And we break fires up into divisions and branches, and that's a way to make sure that not one person doesn't have too many people that are answering to them. So the whole idea with this is that Division Mike here goes from this creek over here to Sulanharas Creek at Fender's Ferry Road. So you pick kind of logical geographic boundaries, and then you assign a division supervisor for that whole area, and then everyone on that section of the line works for Division Oscar or Division Papa or Division Mike. And then each day there's a plan that says Division Mike's going to continue firing from the Oscar Mike break back towards Fender's Ferry Road, and Division Papa is going to take over and fire this part or supervise the 200 people that are putting in this line. So this is kind of the bread and butter map every morning. It shows who's going where, and it's how we communicate the plan to lots of people. So this way, the person in charge of all the operations, they just have to deal with 3 branch directors instead of 800 firefighters asking them what to do. So branches are kind of a higher level of supervision that supervises the divisions. So here you've got Division Oscar, Papa, and Mike all answering to Branch 10. So the operations chief of the fire only really has to talk to his branch chiefs, his branch I don't know what they are, branch managers, a branch director. So you got Branch 20 down here. They've got everything kind of south of the river, and so this Branch 20 is just contingency. So everyone who's doing contingency on the south side of the river works for Branch 20. Everyone who's working between the Pitt River and the shoe fire is working for Branch 10. And that's basically how you keep accountability and keep it from being totally overwhelming for any given person. They know who they work for. So all in all, things are going about as well as you could expect or hope for on the green. And looking at the cameras, it's kind of the same thing we've seen every day, where the fire's smoking away under kind of light, steady winds. We're not getting big gusts, and the fire's not really blowing up. It's hot. You're getting these kind of pretty even. It's hot and maybe breezy, but it's not gusty. Last 2 days, we've had some kind of wild convective activity. So here we've got this kind of thunderhead kind of build up, and doing goofy things, and there's always kind of potential with these kind of things for outflow winds from the thunderstorm to kind of come as gusts. But yesterday we had kind of also some strange big convective activity along this kind of boundary here. Nothing really happened on the fire. So you can see the smoke's just kind of steadily streaming up to the north. As far as they're starting the day kind of shaded by their own smoke, by the afternoon they're kind of breathing all right, but it's just a steady kind of flow. It's hot. The smoke kind of hangs in. You can see the smoke out here. All right. And we also look at these satellite heat maps, and if you see kind of the bright colors pop on here, it tells you the fire's doing something. But like in general, these fires haven't really been flaming. Like there's a big fire up in Oregon, and that's a good example of like what active fire looks like on these things. Is it's kind of this bright orange. That's up by Warm Springs. And if we look at the webcams here, you can see some of that big kind of crazy thunderhead action that's happening farther out to the north. And that's the storm that we're seeing kind of shooting down to the south. All right, so we're going to jump over to the Butler Fire. So zooming out, we're going to fly here from kind of over by I-5 over 299, kind of runs out through here. And so this Butler Fire is burning up on the Salmon River. And when we first talked to Will Harling about this fire when it was still really small, he said, you know, this fire is going to burn out to natural boundaries. You know, they're going to try to stop it on this ridge here, but that hasn't often worked in the past, and you know, no one was super confident that that strategy would work. So here are fires since 2020 that are kind of containing the fire. And the scary thing here has just been whether or not this fire was going to get across and start burning areas that haven't burned for a really long time across the river. There's been a couple spots that have been picked up, and in general the fire is now down to the Salmon River Road for kind of its whole extent. And we've been talking about how this fire is kind of making slope-driven runs like this. It'll run up the slope, and then it'll roll out, and it'll run up again. And that's kind of happening all over this fire. So I thought it'd be interesting on this fire to look also. This also got imaged today by the satellites. And this is kind of our first view of the severity of this fire. And so pink areas are places that like there's no green vegetation left. And then green areas are places that you still do have vegetation. And so we see that where the fire has kind of run out and then made these kind of head fire runs, it's burned severely. And what's interesting also to look at on these is that oftentimes you look at this and you're like, man, that's a lot of high severity, it killed all the trees. But also, oftentimes you zoom in on the severity map and you look at what was there before, and oftentimes it was brush, right? So if we look at all these places that look totally fried, before we get too sad about a large proportion of this fire being high severity, it's like, okay, well, it burned a lot of brush that was burned at high severity in the past. And so when we look at where there's lower severity, we see that a lot of places that were conifers, patches of conifers before the fire, have still have some green on them, right? Like this string right here. There were some big trees there before. So it's kind of too early to say, you know, just how severe this fire is, or if it's, you know, more or less severe than people would hope for. It's kind of, I think, what you would expect, where where you've got head fire in brush. So like this area out here that burned in 2020, it still looks kind of barren, 5 years later. Over here, the Boise fire burned hot on this side of Orleans Mountain last year. You can still see that. This is what it looked like before the fire. Anyway, the kind of for the foreseeable future, this fire is going to continue to burn out to those natural barriers, or to the fire history. You see that it did stop here pretty much. There wasn't a lot of firefighting happening on this flank, but when it hit the 2-year-old burn, pretty much it didn't spread into it. And so the fire is going to keep spreading out. And it'll be interesting to see how far it kind of fingers up into the 2020 red salmon fire over here, but in general, what we see is that areas that burn with a lower severity. Sorry, take this up. In a fire, they tend to burn with a low severity the next time too. So the 2020 burn over here, a lot of it kind of backed down in there, and so that backing fire last time actually prepped this whole area to potentially do better with a head fire from this fire. So oftentimes when I'm saying like, hey, letting these fires burn is the best thing that could happen, is that a lot of the fire effects we've gotten from these previous fires have kind of reset these landscapes that were over thick before, and now they're more prepared to receive this fire that we're getting, even though it's hot and dry and kind of heading into the peak of summer. So we still expect this fire is going to grow out until it hits the 2020 fire. There's not a lot of... what we talk about a lot on here is that the reason this 2020 fire stopped where it was is because this is like the only place they had to control it for, thousands of acres till it got there. So they're prepping these old fire lines from the last fire, and likely this fire is going to burn out to there. Guy named Darren Quigley, who works for the timber industry in Northern California as kind of a fire coordinator, he had a good question, I thought. He said, as part of the initial control strategy on this fire, they put quite a bit of fire on the ground here. They did firing operations to try to kind of get out ahead of the fire. And when you add fire to the landscape, you add heat, you dry things out. And so potentially them putting a bunch of fire on the landscape ahead of this fire increased the severity of the fire when it got there to this area that was already kind of hot, and it had already kind of dried out the surrounding area. So I think it's a fair question, that before we go put fire on the ground, we think about the potential effects of that. If we look at the severity map here, let me see if I can pull up my initial fire line for this thing. I'm sorry to make you watch me drive my computer, but all right, we'll have to do a little more prep on that. But thanks for asking that question, Darren, because like we say, when you put fire on the ground, you own it, and the way that your fire influenced not only the fire you're lighting now, but the fire you might expect in a week, it is an impact. And some places, oftentimes, we talk about, it's hard. Firefighters are action oriented. They're if they have a choice to do something or do nothing, they're always going to do something. And so it's hard sometimes to get people to kind of just sit on their hands and wait a little. They want to hey, we want to use the drone to bring the fire down the road quicker. It's like, well, nature's pretty good at bringing the fire off the hill too, so shouldn't always assume that rushing things is the best thing to do. Over here on the Summit Fire really is pretty much done. This whole side of the fire hasn't spread for several days, and they're pretty much getting this entire fire contained. So we don't have much to report on Summit. So now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the Grand Canyon. So what happened? About the 5th or 6th of July, there was a lightning strike north of the north rim of Grand Canyon, and the fire management folks on the north rim decided to let it burn because they thought it would be good for the forest. And the Grand Canyon has been burning. They've been using fire to manage the ponderosa pine forests and the kind of the pinyon juniper forests of that area for as long as anyone has been doing it in the kind of National Park Service or the Forest Service. So super robust fire program on the Grand Canyon, and it's a really fire adapted and fire prone landscape. Lightning strikes there in the monsoon all the time, so June, July, every year, that area gets pounded with lightning. And so it's got a really frequent fire regime, meaning that in the past, naturally, it would have fires every, 5 to 10 years. So it's been a huge part of their program. They've been super kind of aggressive about using prescribed fire, managing wildfire, and there's also been some large wildfires there over the past 60 years. But Grand Canyon, it burns all the time. And so there's going to be a huge kind of shitstorm now on the folks that decided to let this fire burn. And so we just want to talk a little bit about this fire and kind of share what we have at this point. We're not really going to pass judgment on the situation because we don't know exactly what happens. There's going to be enough people pointing fingers and demanding blood that we're not going to pile on that. But we do want to talk just about kind of how fires get managed for resource benefit, what goes into that planning, and then maybe what went wrong here. Just a few ideas. So here's the current extent of the Dragon Bavo, and the Dragon's actually a kind of a geographic feature out here on the North Rim. If you really want to learn a lot about the North Rim and some of the history there, you should read a book. We're going to bring you a map. There's a book by a guy named Stephen Pine, and Stephen Pine's a geographer and historian, and in college he worked out here on the North Rim as a firefighter, and he ended up working there for like 13 seasons, and he wrote an amazing nonfiction kind of memoir about working there, where he takes kind of stories from every season and he strings it into like one kind of epic season, where in the spring they're out clearing roads and getting stuck in the mud, and then in the summer they're fighting wildfires, and in the fall they're doing prescribed fire. But great book. It's kind of a classic piece of American wildland fire literature, and so big fire here. There's been other fires here in the past, but this one's a mess. So as with our other fire, we want to see kind of what's the severity. Is this fire just like devastating the entire forest? And what we see here is on this particular image, we do this one because it sees through smoke better. The darker areas still have forest. The brown areas are kind of high severity. And so if we take this image here and we kind of make it transparent, we see that some of the areas that have the high severity out here were kind of patchy, scrubby areas before. And so that's why they look kind of roasted, is because that kind of dry grassland and brush is prone to kind of roasting and looking black, which is kind of what shows up on our image here. We're looking for kind of chlorophyll. So there's some high severity fire out here in this area, but there's also within the perimeter of this fire, there's a huge proportion of this fire that is under burning, and this is going to be good for those ponderosa pines, those big trees that we need to keep burning under so they don't get destroyed in a hot wildfire. So right off the bat, not all bad. This fire is kind of flanking its way out, and it's going to probably burn all this, and a lot of this is going to be a benefit. So they got their resource benefit. All right, so it wasn't a total loss. However, the problem is that they burned up this incredible, priceless lodge up here, and they burned up 80 other structures, and terrible, terrible situation. But right off the bat, all right, well, good job on achieving resource benefits with your fire, because it surely achieved a lot, and the forests out here are glad that you did it, but everyone else is pretty bummed. So let's kind of walk through this fire. Dragon Bavo. So here's the first map of it. Here's the North Rim down here, kind of what we would consider to be the WUI. And so Dragon Bavo, it's like 2 miles from the WUI. So here's what happens. This fire starts. They look at where it's burning, and they look at kind of the fire history. They look at their access and decide, well, what's it going to do if we let it burn for a while? And this isn't kind of just drawn on a napkin. So they did a run here of this fire spread model called FS Pro. And so this is a model that was run, it was quarter acre, and they ran this model on the 5th of July. And what this model does, this is kind of called a probabilistic spread model, FS Pro. So fire spread probability is FS Pro. And this is kind of part of the planning process for federal fires, is that early in a fire or any time in a fire, you can run FS Pro, and FS Pro takes our kind of most common spread models, and it takes the fuels and it takes the weather, and it runs out like maybe 10,000 simulations. And each time an area burns in a simulation, it gets a score. So if you run this model 100 times, 80 times the model was going to predict that this area in red was going to burn. So 80 to 100% of the model runs they did, of maybe they ran 1,000 simulations, said, okay, in a certain amount of time, I'm not sure how long, the fire's going to burn here. And they're like, oh, that's good. It doesn't get out to the road. It stays in our little planning area. And so they're like, well, what's the probability it's going to get to like the north rim? And according to this model they ran, it was less than 0.2% probability based on historic weather for this time of year with these fuels that the fire was going to get to here. So this is when relying on modeling for decision support is bad. And this is the best we've got, right? So you got to use something. You can't just draw on a napkin and say like, oh, we think it's fine because I saw a groundhog yesterday. So FS Pro is kind of the standard tool for looking at probability of good or bad outcomes. So it said there was a 0.2 to 4% chance that the fire was going to kind of get pretty big. But they were like, hey, we want these. They were happy. They were all right with this. So this model run advised them in one way. This is not the only thing that goes into their consideration. But this model run said, hey, no problem. Let the fire burn. And no real chance it's going to get to anything that is really like an asset we care about. Okay, so next day, the fire is 2.7 acres. Still great. Like, hey, that's fine. Like, it's been 24 hours and the fire's only spread 2 acres. We're getting good fire effects. Obviously, if the conditions were worse, it would spread more. So let's keep going with this plan. So this purple by then is what they decided on the 6th would be their planning area. So this is kind of like, hey, this is the area that we think we'll keep it within. This is the area that we want to treat. We're going to take it out to the rim. It's not going to go down in the canyon because it's all rock down there. And so, hey, we can kind of focus on keeping it to the west of this drainage here and south of the Point Sublime Road. And so this is the planning area. This is the 9th. So then on the 9th, it's 22 acres. And they show, some previous fires here that, like there's a 2022 fire out here. So that probably played into their planning too. Like, hey, the fire, we don't have to worry about it nuking this area out here because this area burned 3 years ago. And if we look at where the fire's at right now, the fire hasn't gone into that area yet, but likely it's going to be fine, right? Because that's all freshly reduced. So on the 9th, fire's 22 acres. So then, let's see, on the 11th, now the fire's 352 acres. And that's like, now you start seeing divisions on the map and things that they're worried about. Oh, we got the bison exclosures, don't want to burn them up. We start thinking more of like, this is a wildfire now. You got Division Zulu here, and they're going to keep the fire from crossing this road. And they're talking about, oh, we got to prep this road. And suddenly they don't want this fire anymore. But now it's 350 acres, and 350 acres is a lot of work, especially if you don't have access. Right now, suddenly you've got this indirect firefight, and then the 12th, it's like, well, now it's 940 acres. Now that we really got a problem. It crossed the first line here that was kind of a potential control line. Hasn't crossed Point Sublime yet, but accelerating kind of situation. And then on the 13th, it's 3,400 acres, and it's pushing into structures They've got a hell base, but now the hell base that they and the ICP are like actually going to be inside the fire. And then we've got, sorry for that, yesterday's map, and it's like, oh shit, now like everything, the whole North Rim has been swallowed up by this fire, 0% contained, we're going farther out, we're looking at prepping roads way out, this is like, it's a big deal. So, that's kind of the evolution. That's that's about all we have to work with right now as far as kind of data. Probably gonna, we're gonna report more on this. And I was talking to a Washington Post reporter today about it. There's gonna be a big investigation, which is what happens when this kind of stuff goes down. Talked to a retired Park Service fire director this morning. No one at the Park Service, a lot of folks aren't yet ready to kind of speak publicly on this because it's such a hot potato. But when you look at this landscape has had a lot of fire. You've got the National Park, you've got the Kaibab National Forest. I don't think they're going to stop burning out here. And I don't think that this is the end of the Park Service's managed fire program. Every time this happens, it's a major setback for using fire on the landscape, and people have to go back to the drawing board. But as I've kind of said on here many times, like fire doesn't read policy documents. Fire doesn't vote. Fire doesn't care that this administration doesn't want to use fires for resource benefit. Fire just happens, and if we have a bunch of lightning strikes and we can't put them all out, then fires get managed for resource benefit. Chris P. is saying the White Sage fire is close to 60,000 acres. Okay, so we'll go and look at that next. Anyway, this is terrible. Bad news for everyone involved. Kind of what I was thinking about today when I was talking to this reporter is like people don't become a fire management officer for the Park Service unless they have a personal commitment to using fire for good. If you want to manage fire, if you want to be part of using prescribed fire for resource benefit, being a fire management officer for the Park Service in a park that has a strong fire program is a big draw. And so the people that end up in these positions are the people that are willing to take huge personal risk to make that happen. That's the only thing that makes things like this happen. Yosemite burns more than any other California park because they've had people there for years that's their life. That's their life's work and their passion is using fire for resource benefit. So there's going to be a political shitstorm from this. The people that feel strongly about using fire for resource benefit are still going to feel strongly about it in other places. And these programs, they're important and they deserve scrutiny. I think it's unfair to place all the blame on a single individual, the fire management officer that approved the decision, the regional fire director that seconded it, the person that ran the model, the person that built the model. Like, it's easy to kind of compartmentalize this and blame 3 or 4 people for something that is like kind of a socially owned problem, right? Fire exclusion, if we'd put out every fire on the North Rim, we wouldn't have ponderosa pine forest there. It would look like the Dixie Fire. So my hat's off to the people that take these huge risks. I feel bad for them when it does happen. A friend of mine made a call to let the Reading Fire burn in Lassen Park in 2012, and it got away, and it became a big fiasco. And it was a really traumatic event in his career. He stayed there. He worked through it, and he went on to be a really important person in the fire management, the whole world of fire management in California. Just passed away. He suffered greatly personally for his commitment to do the right thing. So my hat's off to the people that do this work, but I don't think that they're above scrutiny, and I'm glad there's going to be an investigation, and I hope we learn stuff. But throwing the entire kind of Park Service fire management program under the bus because this happened, that's not the right thing to do either. One thing I want to say about kind of a contributing factor to this, I'm just going to have to switch over to a different graphic here, is that when you look at the condition of what this place looked like before the fire, like this is the Grand Canyon Lodge, and I've kind of got limited pictures of it, but like this is a place that just burned up, right? And it's got like super flammable pinyon juniper, like right up against the structure. I think it's got a shake roof. I can't tell. If you lived in California, like you would not be able to get insurance for this. So the Park Service, the government doesn't have insurance. They don't have to get insurance. But we have a lot of structures on public land that we keep looking rustic because that's, you know, they're historic and that's what people want. They want to see this beautiful rustic lodge. But like this played no small role in this place burning to the ground. And so you can blame the fire for burning it down. You can blame the people that let the fire get big. But when it comes down to it, also the fact that the lodge was, you know, built right on the edge of a cliff and, you know, covered with heavy brush, like that didn't help, you know. And all these structures, when you look at all these cabins and everything that burnt in the fire, like if I was a CAL FIRE like hazard assessment person, like all these people would be getting citations and would have to like cut their brush, and they'd have to like, you know, maintain their zone 0 and everything else. So yeah, it's you know, it's a really bad situation. But there's like not, it's kind of like the Dixie Fire where PG&E gets the blame for, you know, a million acre fire, but like PG&E didn't create the sick forests. PG&E didn't like come up with the policy of putting out every fire for 100 years. And so it's not really fair to blame PG&E 100% for, like, just like I said before, it's like kind of a socially created problem. Anyway, Norterm's closed. It's a bad scene. That's our background. We'll jump up a little and look at this white sage fire to the north. This will be my first time looking at it. You can see a fire scar out here. This is kind of the alternative, you know, like if you don't manage the fuels out here, then you get fires that burn up everything. So it's fairly kind of intractable problem. Here's the white sage fire, and I don't have much background on this one. I guess we could pull up our Sentinel imagery real quick and look at see if we can get a look at the severity of that one. Right, pull that up in Google Earth. So a large proportion of this fire looks like it's high severity. But you got a bunch of fire down here, the screen that still has canopy. A lot of this area, as we saw in that other place, you know, a lot of this was scrubby before the fire. Looks like you guys have some good commentary going on over here. All right, so that's kind of what we've got for the intel briefing. got a chance to go up in the Feather River Canyon yesterday and look at the Dixie Fire. We're working on a kind of a concept for a movie about the Dixie Fire, so I'm kind of scoping that out, coming up with a route for it. And I want to show you guys a trailer for our new movie that's coming out here next month. This is going to be, let me see if I can get it to play here and get you audio. The LA fires were shocking, and it's easy to feel powerless. But the situation is not hopeless. Ready?
Ready to go. Okay.
Some of my most experienced wildland firefighter friends are joining me on a bike tour of LA.
Bike riding, tacos, and wildfire.
We'll traverse the city from Pasadena to Malibu, looking at the vegetation and architecture and studying the landscape from a firefighter's perspective. Along the way, we'll share insights gained from decades working on large fires.
Pushes everything towards the ocean.
Right. Not looking forward to going out there at all.
We'll talk about the weather patterns that drive large fires.
I bet the inside of that house is gutted.
That's what it kind of looks like, yeah.
We'll provide practical tips and solutions to empower you and your community. Our goal? Rethinking how to live more safely with wildfires. The risks can be overwhelming, but having a better understanding of fire can make life in these fire-prone places feel a little bit less crazy.
Oh!
All right, so that's coming out in August. It's kind of our main project right now, and we're working on a similar concept for Dixie, so stay posted if you're interested in helping sponsor something like that. This project that we're working on right now is sponsored by BurnBot, Fireside, Danko Meredith, Firebox, and we really appreciate their support in making it happen. It's keeping the lookout going. So keep tuned in, and I'm gonna play our sponsors, and then we're gonna get out of here. If I can figure out how to drive this computer. All right, we're thankful to QTAC, WaterX Pumps, and Firebox. Firebox was one of our sponsors for the LA trip also. And there you go. Keep up the commentary going on over there in the sidebar. I'm just checking out, reading your comments.